And I'll now hand over to Jamie Boudreau, who is the head of History of Art at the British Institute of Florence, and he will give us his neighborhood report on Settignano. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Can I have a thumbs up, maybe from Moira, if you can hear me all right? I can see you.
I can hear you. I can't do my thumbs up. Can you see me?
Yes. Okay.
Yep. My goodness.
All right. Welcome back. Good evening, everyone. I am together with Simon in my apology, basically, for not being able to welcome back locals to the library this evening. We are complying with the new measures to contain COVID transmission that have been issued over the weekend. So it was sort of a nice taste of something closer to normal, being in the library a couple of weeks ago to take a look at the Ognissanti. Today we're going to be from home, all of us, but we are going to go with our imaginations and our minds up outside of the city walls to a fraction of the city of Florence known as Settignano. So I'm sort of taking us out of the neighborhoods that we've been looking at up until now to show us something of a bit of a greener space. And the image that I've chosen to title this talk is a sculpture that can be found in Settignano, and it is a representation of one of that village's most important sculptors of the 15th century, known as Desiderio da Settignano. His actual name was Desiderio di Bartolomeo di Francesco, but because he comes from this town, we see this commonly with figures like Leonardo da Vinci. Desiderio da Settignano simply means that this artist came from this particular village, and in the early 20th century, this monument was erected in his honor, incorporating a sculpture produced by Vittorio Caradosi. So this is a place that you may have never heard of, but you may be familiar with the name of Settignano because it is associated with several very important sculptors historically, and I'd like to explore a little bit of that together with you this evening. Settignano is not far from the historic center. It is a fraction of the municipality of the city of Florence today, so we don't have to get far to get to Settignano, even if psychologically you feel like you're leaving the city of Florence, coming out into the hills. It's still technically part of our town, and this fraction of Settignano can be found just to the northeast of the sort of end of the development of the area of Campo di Marte, where we have our stadium and Palasport Center. It can be from the center or in that neighborhood that you can hop on a bus to take you out to some of these hills leading into the northern valleys, as well as the area of Fiesole. So while it seems like it's sort of far away, it's not at all. It really is just an extension of the city that was never developed really the way the center had been because of its topography. And so what I'd like to do is just sort of take a few minutes to talk a bit about the importance of this place. It's a village that I guess we could consider pretty typical for a small Italian village. We have a central piazza, we have a church, we have an oratory, we have a post office, we have a couple of bars. You know, it's not really what we have in the central piazza of Settignano that attracts people to this area. It's really what you can find taking any of the streets really from this piazza in any direction to arrive to the wonderful views offered by this hill. Here's an example of what you can see walking away from that piazza towards one of the villas that I will introduce to you, looking back to a very clear view of the dome, the bell towers, and some of the other monuments of the city. For those of you who had joined us months ago, I guess at this point, when we were looking at the Santissima Annunziata, I think that was one of my first contributions to the Wednesday Cultural Program, we had mentioned a passage of the famous novel A Room with a View, written by E.M. Foster, in which the English visitors to Florence are taken by their local British expat residents out to Settignano in search of the views captured in the paintings of Alesso Baldovinetti. And this is a comically long chapter title that took the film adaptation 3 frames to include in the feature film. But of course, this is the moment where we've got the kiss, we've got you know, a bit of dynamic and character development established in this moment of the film. And if you have seen this movie, or if you're familiar with the movie, this was all filmed on site here in Florence and around. So these really are the views that we have at our disposal when we head up into this area of the city. We can also get a view into some of the northern valleys and the eastern valleys. If we think about these rolling hills that kind of take us into the areas north of Fiesole, towards the Mugello, or perhaps further east towards the area of Sieci. This is all land that has remained largely undeveloped. There's lots of agriculture, of course, olive groves and vineyards, but we don't have sprawl here, again, because of the hilliness of the area, as well as the practically impenetrable bedrock that we find underneath the topsoil in much of this area. Settignano is the hometown not only of Desiderio, that wonderful Renaissance sculptor. Giovanni Boccaccio was also born in Settignano, and you might remember that name, the author of the Decameron, a famous collection of short stories, which was written just after the Black Death in the second half of the 14th century. And that story follows a group of young people fleeing the city of Florence to escape the plague, and holding themselves up in a villa out in the Florentine countryside. And it is there that they hope, with fresh air and isolation from their fellow Florentines, that they will be able to sort of make their way through this pestilence. It's something, a bit of a different read nowadays than it was maybe a few years ago. If you're sort of reading the Decameron post 2020, this is a great place to sort of see how pandemic had been handled by people in the Middle Ages, and it has remained a very important example of late medieval Tuscan literature. So we've got paintings commemorating this right up through into the 19th century, early 20th century. And I think it's easy for us to imagine when we go to Settignano, the type of views and villas that would have been in the mind of someone like Giovanni Boccaccio as he was writing these stories to give to the Florentine people in that generation after the Black Death. While we have writers, politicians, other important historical figures that were born in Settignano, overwhelmingly the figures remembered from this town are associated with the practice of sculpture and stone carving and quarrying. And that is again because of this area, which I'm showing you here on 2 maps. One is a pretty standard Google map that I've included just to show you that the Cathedral of Florence is already sort of contained within this square. So Settignano is very close, closer than Fiesole even. And what we can see on the lower map is the topography of the area. So it's here that we have several important historical quarries from which Pietra Serena and Macigno were carved, brought down into the city. And if we take a look at this photograph, which is taken on one of the trails that you can take from Settignano up to another village that has a very similar history, being a sort of an enclave, let's say, of stone carvers and their families. That's that town or village that's found between Settignano and Fiesole is known as Maiano. So if you've heard of Desiderio da Settignano, you may have heard of Benedetto da Maiano, the same sort of thing. We sort of name these people and identify them from their hometowns. That is another area which is very important in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance for the extraction of the materials going into the construction of monuments like our bridges, our walls, our churches, our city hall. All of the embellishments of architecture in the Renaissance are typically employing a local blue-gray colored sandstone known as Pietra Serena. And this is where we can find the quarries of that particular stone. And if you take a look at this photograph, you can see that Pietra Serena, not unlike Pietra Forte, is formed over eons, basically, through geological pressure and compression. And we find this also, not just here in Tuscany or in Florence, but if you've been to the coastlines of the Adriatic, both in Italy and on the opposite side. This is a standard feature that we find in this area of the Mediterranean, these waving sort of lines and strata of stone. looking at that, it might be easier to understand why this was such a popular place for quarrying, because if you quarry the stone the right way, a lot of the work of sort of hewing out the stone is already basically done for you. If you're concerned with producing regular rectangular ashlar blocks of masonry, you can do that pretty easily just due to the natural formation of the stone. There are hiking trails, as I'd said, that can connect from Settignano to Maiano, and there's, I believe, another. This trail is known as the Via dei Scapolini, or the trail of the stone carvers. And I'm not sure if it's called the same thing, but there's another trail that can take you further from Maiano all the way up to Fiesole. So it's a wonderful place to go hiking if you want to get into the nature and the beautiful surroundings here in the dintorni of Florence, the surroundings of Florence. But it also has a bit of culture and history as well. You can visit some of these quarries from which the Pietra Serena had been extracted historically to provide the materials for the great building projects of the Renaissance. And this is what it looks like. So this is a natural version of what we see in terms of the colors of Florence. If we look at Palazzo Vecchio, if we look at the bridges spanning the Arno River, this is the sort of material that we have right outside of the walls. And this is why we see the development early on of communities, entire communities of stone carvers up here in this area, nestled in these hills between Florence and Fiesole. Michelangelo, who was born in 1475 in the small town of Caprese in the Casentino, which is the sort of hinterland above Arezzo, where we have the headwaters of the Arno River, was moved at a very young age with his family from that area to Settignano and spent the early years of his life in that city. And much later on, as an adult and an accomplished artist, sculptor, and architect, his life and times were recorded by several biographers, including Paolo Giovio, Giorgio Vasari, and Ascanio Condivi. And what we learned from all of those biographies, essentially, is that Michelangelo was convinced that it was his time as a child in this particular village that gave him the abilities to become a great sculptor. It's sort of absorbed through osmosis, this talent for stone carving. And if we are to take him literally, his mother died at a very young age, and so like other children of his class, of his station, he would have been provided with a balia, and the balia is the term for Tuscan in this period of a wet nurse. And according to Michelangelo, his wet nurse was the wife and daughter of a large family of stone carvers in Settignano, and it was through her breast milk that the marble dust and the shavings of Pietra Serena made their way into his body to form him into the great sculptor that he would eventually become. A few years ago, along the trail, the Via dei Scapolini, this plaque was positioned to commemorate the early life of Michelangelo and his connection to this area with that excerpt. And it just sort of tells us here that in this place, which is full of stones and rock and full of wonderful caves and quarries, it's from here that the workers in sculpture and stone carving continued to be produced. And were, for the most part, all of the important people that we think of were born here. And it was here also that my balia, gave me this sort of destiny to become a sculptor through her very own breast milk. So I don't know if you want to sort of take that literally or psychologically, but this is something that you can find on that trail. He doesn't live there very long, but he is an illustrious resident, let's say, in his childhood. And he, throughout his life, gives a great debt to the sort of village of Settignano and its surroundings for the ability of a city like Florence to produce such an extraordinary constellation of sculptors. And this is not limited to the Renaissance. Basically every generation produces a pretty important figure, working either in stone or in marble from this area. And I'm just showing you a couple of them, including important Renaissance artists such as Bernardo and Antonio Rossellino. Desiderio da Settignano we've already looked at. Going into the High Renaissance, Bartolomeo Amanati was born in Settignano. Domenico Caffaggi, Stoldo Lorenzi, Chiarissimo Fancelli. Moving into the Baroque, Gioacchino Fortini, and even into the period of the last of the Lorraine Grand Dukes, Ottaviano Giovanozzi, who produced some of the most important marble busts of the last of the Lorraines came from Settignano. So it's not just Michelangelo that has this idea. It seems to be that Settignano is the sort of constant sort of producer, let's say, of these very important artists. And more often than not, they are not isolated in terms of their talent, abilities, and vocations, but are born into entire families of carvers or sculptors. One example can be found in the Gamberelli family of stone carvers and sculptors. One of the members of this family, one of the youngest children of this family, whose name was Antonio Gamberelli, had very, very bright red hair. And so he's sort of passed down to us with this indicator sort of nickname. He's not Antonio da Settignano, but Antonio Rossellino, almost like Bronzino, giving you an idea of a coppered complexion. Rossellino basically means Tony the Redhead. And I don't know if his other brothers were redheads or not, but because of the fame and the success of one of the youngest of this group of sculptors, that nickname of redhead is given back to all of his older brothers. So we also talk about figures like Bernardo Gamberelli, simply with this reference of Rossellino, Bernardo Rossellino. So these are two, as I mentioned, sculptors of a large family of carvers. They were all active in some way in the major workshops here in Florence and beyond in the 15th century. And this name Gamberelli is not one that we think of immediately, again, because we tend to refer to Rossellino, even if they're not redheads, everyone's calling them Rossellino, so we just sort of go along with that. But the Gamberelli family had a sort of multi-generational establishment in history there in the area just east of the center piazza of the village of Settignano. And tradition holds that the Villa Gamberaia was constructed on the remains of the original homestead of the Gamberelli family of sculptors, and whether that name is sort of a corruption of Gamberelli, I'm not really sure, but this is a view of one of the important villas that we have just outside of the city, together with its gardens and orchards that lead us into the views not only of the city of Florence, but also the valleys in the opposite direction. Oops, there's a misprint there. Settignano's with the double T, sorry about that. Here is an engraving produced based on the drawings of Giuseppe Zocchi, which show us the appearance of that villa as it had been constructed, we believe, in the early 1600s. So the Gamberelli at this point are long gone, and it's at this point that the Caponi family purchased the land and built a villa that will be extended in later centuries. It was a very popular destination following its purchase by the, I believe, the sister of the Queen of Serbia, that in this period of the Grand Tour and having lots of expats and these sorts of people, visitors coming to Florence, this would have been one of the standard places to go up and check out the wonderful views. Edith Wharton had visited there, and she was recorded in her own publication of 1904, Italian Villas and Their Gardens, that the Gamberaia villa in Settignano had made perhaps the strongest impact on her, going and touring all of these different spaces and gardens. And she is quoted with you know, sort of putting this up on the top of the list as probably the most perfect example of the art of producing a great effect on a small scale. Now, that was written in 1904, and unfortunately, most of the villa was entirely bombed out in the Second World War. It was used by the Nazis as basically a residence and a sort of a work center. And so following the damage incurred in that period, it was entirely reconstructed. Our own Harold Acton, who published an important volume on the villas of Tuscany, both in English and Italian in 1973, also praises the reconstruction, the faithful reconstruction of this building. And I'll just read this out to you. According to Acton, the Villa Gamberaia has the most poetical garden near Florence. In its homely simplicity, Villa Gamberaia is a perfect foil, as it were, to the elaborate embroidery of its garden. From a distance, as in Zocchi's engraving, the latter is invisible, approached by a narrow lane from Settignano. With its projecting eaves and coined angles in Pietra Serena, the two-story structure differs from others of the species by the addition of flying arcades to the north and the south. Though it has the characteristics of a 16th century building, it dates from the beginning of the 17th. One would never guess that it has arisen like the phoenix from its ashes, since it was wholly gutted during the last World War, because its present owner has restored it with such scrupulous integrity that it is, if anything, finer than it was before. A miracle of aesthetic reconstruction. So we're fortunate to have a version of this villa today, even if it is a 20th century reconstruction following the bombing and the damage of the Second World War. This is a view showing both extensions of gardens now from a different perspective. And these are the flying arcades that he was talking about, that Acton had referenced in that description. This is a private villa today. It's rented out for weddings and events. Well, if you can do that sort of thing nowadays, it also can be rented as a residence. It has wonderful sort of pools. There is a limonaya up here where you can have weddings if it's a rainy day. And there are some interesting grottos and other sorts of bits and pieces of the property that you are welcome to explore on appointment. They're very nice up there, and if you want to go up and walk around the gardens, all you have to do is call them up and ask for a time, and they're very accommodating. The space is one of several that we have in this area, so it's not like this is the only villa up there near Settignano. We've got plenty of others, and if we were to walk away from that villa and make our way back to the sort of central piazza, I'll just peek in with you quickly, as I had done on Sunday last, as part of my reconnaissance trip, which ended with a very pleasant lunch in this piazza. We hopped into the church to make sure that everything I thought and remembered was there was actually still there. What I'm showing you here is an aerial view again of that piazza, with the church of Santa Maria Assunta, known more popularly as the Church of Santa Maria in Settignano. And this has, as we would hope and expect, a great example of artwork produced by local sculptors and other figures. Walking into that church, we can see some examples of crucifixes and other sort of sculptural objects in the area of the high altar, produced by local artists, including these wonderful terracotta angels attributed to the Della Robbia workshop. We also have some later frescoes produced to decorate the domes, not only of the high altar, but also of some of the other spaces. I had sort of got there right after midday Sunday Mass, and I was afraid they were going to shut the door in my face. The priest was absolutely wonderful, let me in, gave me sort of a 5-cent tour, a penny tour, and showed me all these wonderful things. And one of the things that I was, again, expecting was to see some pretty good sculpture. There is an early 15th century terracotta representation of Santa Lucia, which is attributed to Michelangelo, as well as a beautiful figure of San Giovanni. I couldn't find an attribution to this sculpture here, but this is above the baptismal font and is dated to around 1751. So again, it's not just the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. We have sculptors continuing to work throughout the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries here in this village. Off in the sort of side aisle, in the northern side aisle, is an entrance to the Chapel of the Holy Sacrament. And there we can also find an important early 17th century painting produced by Andrea Comodi. It's a representation of the Last Supper. And if you were with us a few weeks ago looking at the Church of the Ognissanti, we had looked at some of the work produced there historically, including the Last Supper of Domenico Ghirlandaio. We compare that to a couple of other examples of that subject represented in Renaissance frescoes, and I'm just offering you here an alternative if you're sick of looking at those banquet tables and that standard sort of compositional type, which is adopted usually here in Italy to represent Christ's Last Supper together with his apostles. Take a look at this wonderful Baroque turning of the table now, trying to get those figures out into our space, sharing our space as viewers. We can see Christ sitting here at the head of the table, and a very different arrangement of the participants of that supper, together with some attributes that we've already seen before, including a cat here next to the figure of Judas. A lovely, lovely work from 1615. If we were to make our way out of the square and into some of the other lower plains just below the central square of Settignano, making our way down perhaps to the area known as Ponte a Mensola, we can also find some other important historical villas that were used as residences by illustrious visitors, including Mark Twain, who I'm showing you here in a portrait produced by a Florentine artist here in Florence during one of Twain's trips to Italy. Edoardo Gelli produced this for him, and I believe that years later, Twain was invited to speak at the World's Fair at St. Louis, and he could not make it because his wife was ill and didn't want to leave her behind. And so he sent this painting in his place, basically, to be exhibited somehow, to be able to participate in the World's Fair, and basically wrote a note attached with it saying, I know you're disappointed I can't be there, but in my opinion, this is better than the original. So, you know, take the painting. That was produced again on one of several trips that were taken by Twain and his wife. And in the late 1880s, early 1890s, I believe, he spends about a year and a half at another villa in this area of Settignano known as the Villa Viviani. And the Villa Viviani was a place where, like many of these writers at the end of the 19th century, they were hoping to find the solitude and the inspiration of the beautiful sort of setting there to be productive. And Mark Twain, in his travel diaries, is recorded as writing that his views from his room at the Villa Viviani afforded the most charming view to be found on this planet. And this is coming from someone who was pretty critical of Italian cities and monuments and things. I mean, you know, when Twain went to Venice and he saw the Basilica of St. Mark's, you know, he said it looked like a water bug sitting in a swamp. It was such a bizarre, weird building. He absolutely hated the Basilica of St. Mark's. So he's pretty judgmental when it comes to some historical art and architecture here. But he absolutely loved his time in Settignano, and he was not the only person to do so. We've got many people sort of retiring in Settignano after careers elsewhere in Italy or even further abroad. There's an important cemetery also in this town that you can visit and see some beautifully carved sort of mausoleum-like graves and tombs of figures who, even if they weren't born there, chose to be buried there following an important experience, maybe at the end of their lives, living there after growing up elsewhere. The time in which Mark Twain was in Settignano and in Florence is far from us now, and I think we have to use a bit of imagination to go back to that time period, and it really is the 1880s and the early 1890s that is sort of peak Settignano period. It is important not only for these foreign visitors, largely writers and novelists. We also have an attraction to that village by a collection of painters who are in part associated with a general movement here in Italy known as the Machiaolo movement. But we have a sort of a movement within that sort of larger collection of artists that concentrates early on here in Italy in the practice of all'aperto painting, painting outside. And that seems normal to us today, but this was something that took a while to come around and become popular. We really don't see outdoor painting happening until the second half of the 19th century. That is in part due to technological introductions, such as the field easel. If you've ever seen the sort of easel kit that you can sort of telescope the legs out and carry your paints up to the top of the mountain and set up your canvas and do all that sort of stuff outside. A plein air is the French term that we also use in English when we're speaking about this practice of working directly from nature outside. These are some of the earliest artists in Italy to not bring drawings and sketches back to the studio to produce finished works in the studio, but to produce works of art out there in the streets, in the piazzas, on the hillsides. And there's no better representation of the enthusiasm for the natural beauty of Settignano than Telemaco Signorini, who was born to a father painter, Giovanni Signorini, who had worked for the last of the Grand Dukes. He was born in the district of Santa Croce. And if we can imagine Santa Croce on the map of Florence, just beyond that and beyond the walls that lead us to the area of Piazza Beccaria today, remains largely undeveloped. And that area was also quite rural. And the space leading down from Settignano to the banks of the Arno River is known, at least geographically, as the Piagentina. And so you might come across the term, the School of the Piagentina, or the Scuola della Piagentina. And this is a term meant to identify Telemaco Signorini and some of his fellow Machiaoli who are concerned particularly with the production of landscapes as well as scenes of daily life from the inhabitants of these small villages outside of the walls of the city. The Machiaoli movement, like a lot of things here in Italy that, turn out well, get started in a bar. And that bar is located very close to the seat of the Accademia del Disegno, or the Accademia delle Belle Arti di Firenze, just off of the Piazza San Marco. If you were to go up what is known as the Via Cavour today, towards the area of Piazza San Marco, you can find the location of an historic cafe where many of the students of the academy typically gathered. That did not survive to the 20th century, but we know of its importance for the assembly of these figures in the mid-19th century, thanks to paintings as well as a plaque that was placed on the building that housed this Cafe Michelangelo originally. And that tells us that this building was located, the Cafe Michelangelo, genial meeting place for a group of free artists that the Florentine wit called Machiaoli, and whose works, born between political struggles and the warlike heroism of national unification, they carried the light of Italian pictorial tradition, renewing its spirits. And so this is sort of an homage, let's say, to all of these figures, including who many understand to be the founder of this movement, Giovanni Fattori. But Telemaco Signorini is one that sort of travels outside of Italy more than some of his contemporaries. His appearance is known to us thanks to this wonderful sort of caricature showing us the back room of the Cafe Michelangelo. He's number 6 on this drawing, together with others that are identifiable in terms of their caricatures. And he, again, because of his sort of upbringing in this area already on that side of the city, falls immediately in love with Settignano in particular. He had traveled in his youth. He had been up to England. He had been to Germany. He had been throughout Italy, spending time in Rio Maggiore, in Liguria, and other places. But in the end of his life, he really sort of settles in this area. And when we look at the later paintings produced by him in the 1880s and the 1890s, they are devoted almost exclusively to the representation of the wonderful landscape that we have in this area. I didn't have time to sort of find all the titles and dates and locations of these. Many of these works of Telemaco Signorini, if not the majority, are found in private collections today, but we do have some great examples within our state museums here in Florence. Here you can see that road, which for us today is just a bus ride. Back then it probably would have been walking up the road, or taking the horse and carriage or something like that. The different seasons, as they are perceived in the countryside as opposed to the city, was of a particular interest to Telemaco. So I'm just showing you here some of these wonderful paintings that were done, again, not in the studio, but really out there in the olive groves, trying to capture that wonderful Tuscan light, as well as the vegetation, including these olive trees, and some of the domesticated animals. This looks like we must have a canina, sort of a white county bull down there in the background. It wasn't just the natural landscape, but also the people, the poetry of everyday ordinary life that was celebrated by the painting activity of Signorini here in Settignano. And if we want to imagine being in the shoes of Mark Twain, walking up these streets to get to the village center, this is probably the type of setting that would have been available to him. All of these paintings were authored by Telemaco Signorini, and all of them represent areas of the village of Settignano, or the streets leading away from the piazza towards the villas on the various slopes of this area. And that fountain is still there, and I think that trattoria is still there as well. Here you can see one of several paintings in a bit sort of better weather of the central square as it appeared to Signorini. And I will point out here that there is an antique trattoria named the Trattoria of the Scheggi. And this is a historic restaurant that was up there, and it had sort of a back terrace and sort of outdoor space and sort of a courtyard. That was also the subject of one of the most important examples of Signorini's paintings that we have in the collection of the Modern Art Gallery at Palazzo Pitti. And that is this work showing one of the outdoor tables, void of people. We've got a solitary cat here sitting very human-like, probably waiting for its dinner out there, as cats tend to do, looking out at the wonderful landscape and the bell tower of the church beyond. This is showing sort of the turning of the seasons towards winter, perhaps, but this is the sort of imagery that I think is cemented into our minds and our imaginations when we try to think of these important figures who visited Settignano or perhaps grew up and lived in Settignano or even retired there. This is what they were all falling in love with back then. And I'm happy to report that it has not changed very much at all. You can still go up and really feel this sense of the natural beauty and the rural and rustic simplicity of that space, in contrast to the bustling traffic of the city center. You know, this is a great way to escape and sort of get out of the bustle of things. I'm not sure if that Scheggi family is in connection to one of the last sort of great artists to be born in Settignano, but if you've ever heard of the short-lived expressionist Paolo Scheggi, that Antica Trattoria dei Scheggi, I'm not sure if he's part of the same family, but Settignano's pretty small, so it's likely. If you've ever been into some of the modern and contemporary art galleries of Italy and found this sort of stuff on the wall, it might have been produced by Paolo Scheggi, who unfortunately died at the age of 31 in the 1970s. He's the sort of Connect Four guy, if you've seen these geometric sculptures hanging in the walls. I think we also have one perhaps in the Casamonti collection here in Florence. But he was one of the last or the most recent great figures. We hope that Settignano continues to produce sculptors, artists, and writers for generations to come. But he is one of the more recent, and again, showing us a style which is quite different from those earlier Renaissance masters that we began with. So if you need to get out of town, if they let you, again, this is just a bus ride away. You can hop on the 10 from San Marco to get up to Settignano, and you can enjoy these views as many of these historical figures that I've introduced to you this evening had done in previous centuries. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I will try my best to answer them now as we enter into the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. We now got the thumbnails up. So the usual protocol, if you want to ask a question or make a point, I think we'll just let you unmute yourself and off you go. So the floor is open. Who wants to go first?
Oh my God, it's me, and I'm sorry, but I have a question for Jeremy.
Hi, Jennifer.
That Villa Gamberelli is owned by whom, and how do we get to visit it? Who do we get in touch with? Maybe
there's a website. It's got a number. There's an email. There's a wonderful little lady. They've got like a bookshop entrance sort of place. It doesn't look very welcoming from the street because it's all sort of walled in. But open the door, they buzz you right in, and I can find it and put it in the chat if that's helpful for people.
That'd be great. I seem to have been thrown off the Zoom, but
What? Yeah, we've all been through. We can see your little corner picture. We've lost Simon.
Oh yeah, I've just sorted it out. So, somebody accidentally shared the screen. We're now back.
Anyway, can I just finish and say thank you, Jeremy. It was absolutely wonderful, and I can't wait to visit Settignano.
And you've got the link now in the chat, Jennifer, that takes you right to the landing page at the Villa Gamberelli. And I see that someone here on the talk actually stayed there. Huh, that's nice.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Nancy is asking in the chat if there are also marble quarries. I don't think so. We've got Pietra Serena and Macigno, which is sort of the warmer color of that same stone there in the north. The Pietra Forte of the city was typically quarried from areas of the opposite bank and sort of the southern area of the Oltrarno and beyond. Marble, we are still taking pretty much from the coastal areas of Carrara and Seravezza.
Kate started sharing her screen again. Please stop doing that. I can get rid of it, but it's better if you don't do it in the first place. So please don't hit the green share screen button, anybody, because that's causing chaos. Any other questions or comments? Penny.
Can I ask, Jeremy, did you find the villa that C.H. Lawrence rented in Settignano? Do you know where that is?
No, I had to sort of whittle away. You know, I went into like a Villa Itati, Bernard Berenson kind of rabbit hole, and I just, you know, trashed it all about a half an hour before the talk. No, I didn't look into D.H. Lawrence, but yeah, he's another example of someone who was recorded as being particularly shaped by experiences there at Settignano.
Yeah, I mean, he said that in a letter that he'd got a villa for £5 a year.
Yeah.
We were able to travel. I want that.
if you find it, let me know.
Yeah, exactly.
These things that you see nowadays in the news where they're giving you, like, you know, letting you buy a house for €1 to try to get you to come into the community or something.
Yeah, well, not in Settignano, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either. There was one real estate office that I saw in the piazza on Sunday at lunch, and those prices were not cheap for the...
But Mario, did you have something you wanted to ask?
No, I was just going to ask about Villa Itati, but Jeremy has already, you know, given us the reason that he went down that particular avenue and decided it was perhaps another lecture altogether.
Yeah, how close is Itati actually to Settignano village?
It's on the way up. There's sort of a plain called the Ponte a Mensola, and then there's a bridge, so the Ponte a Mensola. And there you also have a beautiful church, which has some early altarpieces by the Gaddi family, I believe. And there's a bus stop, and I remember this from my toils in graduate school, you know, sort of walking from the bus stop up this never-ending hill to get to the Villa Itati to get in and access the collections there. It's absolutely a wonderful place, and it is maintained very well by Harvard, and it's sort of their postdoctorate kind of research seat here in Italy. It's a wonderful place to go. It's got an important collection, as well as archival materials from Berenson, from his wife, and figures of his, you know, contemporaries of his time here in Italy.
Okay. More thoughts, interventions, or questions from anybody?
Yes, could I ask a question?
Hello, Susan.
That was very interesting. I'd like to know a bit more about more recent sculptors and their connection with Settignano, like Bartolini or the Romanelli. Did they continue this, or maybe they were more interested in marble?
Yeah, I don't think I have any particular connection of those figures to Settignano in terms of birth or residence. I mean, at that point, you know, when we're looking at the 1800s, I think a lot of the training in sculpture is now being contained within the structure of the Fine Arts Academy. Mm-hmm. You also have some smaller sort of workhouses and studios like that of Bartolini or Romanelli. But I don't know if location at that point is so important for sort of forming sculptors. I don't think that either of those figures have any particular connection to Settignano.
Okay.
Jeremy, there's a couple more questions in the comments if you want to look there in the chat.
Yes, I see. Someone's asking me about the bus. I got the bus. It still goes. And it leaves, I don't know, it's not terrible. It's usually every 15 or 20 minutes. And then the piazza in Settignano is the capolinea, so it just sort of stays there for a while, lets people on, and then goes back down. So if there's no bus when you get back to the piazza, you know, you can get a beer at the Circolo and just wait for the next one, and they usually come up within a half an hour. It's very easy to get up and down. Spent about, you know, 3 or 4 hours up there and was back home by early afternoon.
And somebody else is asking for you to make a comparison between Settignano and Fiesole in terms of its personality, its historical importance, etc.
I mean, Fiesole is really the settlement. They say that Settignano had been kind of founded as a village during the reign of the Emperor Septimius Severus, so 3rd century. You know, Fiesole was inhabited by the Etruscans already centuries BC. So that's a much older place in terms of people living there and developing that area. There are still ruins of the Etruscans and the Romans and the Longobards that sort of came after them. So Fiesole is much more of a sort of a developed population in antiquity. And I don't think that you have anything sort of large happening in Settignano historically. You know, it was never reduced from something bigger than it is now. It kind of remains the place where people live to have access to the quarries for building.
Yeah. Fiesole was important enough to have its own Roman amphitheatre, for example. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's older than Florence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Better defensive position. Cyrus very usefully put up the bus timetable for those who want to get precise times. Number 10 bus. Don't
bring your hand gel and you can get on the bus.
Information. Any more before we let Jeremy go and get some supper?
No, thank you very much, Jeremy. That was great. And a lovely walk from Fiesole to Settignano if you're not in a hurry.
Yeah,
and if you're going downhill, I think if you go from Fiesole down to Maiano, it's much easier. Much easier than hiking up. And if you do that, if you take the bus, what goes up to Fiesole, the 7? If you take the bus up to Fiesole, it's very easy to get to those trails from center Fiesole, and as you walk down past the quarries, you end up basically at the Villa di Maiano. And there you also have the Fattoria di Maiano, where you can have a great lunch also. So there's plenty of places to go and have lunch up there.
Okay, well that's all lovely things to look forward to in the spring, early summer, when you can all hopefully come back to Florence and start enjoying all this in presenza rather than virtually through Zoom. Before I thank Jeremy, I just want to put in my weekly plea and reminder that if you can and are so disposed, please consider making a donation to our Just Giving site. We are obviously hemorrhaging income because of the new phase of the soft lockdown here in Florence, and it's going to be a tough winter. So anything you can do is greatly appreciated. And Sarah will put up the link on the chat to make it easy. So it just remains for me to thank Jeremy once again for another fascinating and inspirational neighborhood visit in Florence. I think the next one in next month is going to be, we're going to the Cascine, the great park on the east side of Florence on the river. So thank you very much, Jeremy, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Have a great night, and we'll see you all next week for House of Secrets Part 2. All right, bye now.
Thanks for
Thank you very, very much. Thank you
very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ben.